All right, welcome. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for this Thursday evening session on the beginning of the 4th of July weekend. As you can see, this is a little bit of a different setup than what you're used to on Thursday nights. We've given Sister Rona the night off. But thank you again for giving us this opportunity to share with all of you. And so today, we thought we would take you on a little bit of a journey. And I hope you're all looking forward to hearing some stories, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, you saw the title of our session was labeled From Wall Street to Wellness, a transformation in the making. Well, I guess I would start out by first introducing myself, as my name is Satyan Shah, and this is my good friend, Don Cogsville. You'll learn more about us as we start chatting, but just as a brief introduction, I have been practicing this Raj Yoga meditation for almost 5 years, and have also been working in the finance field in Wall Street for over 13 years. And without telling you too much more, we'll just let the story start to develop. And so what I would say is that, before I will introduce Don properly, but I just want to give you a little bit of a background about myself and kind of what led us, both me and Don, onto this pathway. Every one of us at some point in this world starts to think and realize whether or not the path they've chosen is actually the right one. And for me, I was going along a certain path as to what I was told was correct, what society has deemed proper, and what society would accept me for, and what society values. And as I was going through that path, I was starting to stray more and more from who I felt I really was. And at a certain point, I had to stop and reflect to see whether or not what I was trying to achieve, what I was trying to get to, that success and that happiness, was I really going to get what I wanted with the path that I was taking? And I really had to stop and think, because there were many things on my journey that made me stop and reflect and possibly reshift the way I was thinking about what true success would mean. And so, just to give you a little bit of background of my story, I grew up basically thinking that success was based upon the school that I was going to go to, the education that I was going to achieve, the type of job I was going to get, the titles that I would receive, the salary I would get, the bonuses I would get, what other people thought of me as a person, and the value that I would get by achieving, all of these things. But the one common thing amongst all of these things are that they were external. And none of these things had anything to do with who I was as a person. But I didn't realize that till later on in life. So I was working fine on Wall Street. Everything was going well. I was working at Goldman Sachs. I got to travel the world. I went and hobnobbed with some of the top people in the world. I was in Japan. I went to China. I was flying across the world and managing money for some of the wealthiest people in the world. And I started to feel that I created all of these false sort of identities of myself. And I thought that I was really important for a long time. And I was achieving, I was making money, everybody was feeling good and they valued me, and I had friends in the industry. But then 2008 happened, and my world sort of came crashing down. I lost my job. I lost my titles. I lost the money in the market. I was having problems in relationships. And my value of who I was getting crushed completely. And it was from that point that I started to have to look a little bit deeper. And I had to sort of think about maybe what I was trying to achieve, if something was taken away so quickly, just like that, and my whole sense of self was completely drowning, maybe there's another place I need to look to figure out who I really was and how do I truly value myself. And it was really from that point on that I started the journey inwards, and I went on several different paths and finally ended up in this path of Raj Yoga. And so with that, I wanted to sort of introduce my good friend, Don Cogsville. Don is a very talented man, and he will describe some of the things that he's been through. But just as a brief introduction, he originally, I think, started out as a professional soccer player who was out of school, right? And then sort of slowly then studied further and became an attorney. And after a number of years after that, he had several jobs, I think, in Wall Street, doing various things, and is now currently the CEO of his new entrepreneurial company in the private equity space. So he's done a lot of interesting things. And just so that everybody knows, Don and I actually worked together back in, I think it was like 2005, 2006, when we were starting a investment management company with a couple of other people. So that's how we sort of met, 2006. And after that, we sort of lost touch for 10 years. And then we'll talk about that, how we sort of rekindled that relationship. So just to start off for you, I mean, you heard sort of my story in terms of what I was thinking about as I was growing up and some of the values that were sort of imposed upon me in terms of what is success and what you need to achieve to be quote unquote happy and successful. Like, how did you grow up? Like, what were some of the values that were inculcated for you?
Well, thank you, Satyan.
Yeah.
I think you nailed it more or less in terms of what the trajectory of my career has been. And I typically chose careers that were results-oriented careers. But where I started, I think, in my family was a family with a father who was very hard driving and who sort of very early on, athletics became very important.
Right.
So even the game of soccer, which was ultimately what I played professionally for the U.S. national team, wasn't really a game. It was really, really a profession almost at the age of 12.
Wow.
And so I worked extremely hard, and it was complicated because it wasn't something that I could take as a pastime like many of the other kids that I had. So I grew up getting up, from the age of 10 at 5 in the morning every morning, and practicing a couple hours before I got on a 7 o'clock school bus to go to school, and where the other kids weren't doing that. And it meant a lot, winning and losing. So as you discussed, sort of, you got to a sort of a period of time where Wall Street collapsed. it seemed like every other week was a win or a loss, or a win or a loss, and it was a very up and down sort of environment for me, because if we lost, it was a bad week. If we won, it was a good week.
Right.
And that was how I grew up. And I got a lot of adulation, but the adulation really came only when the wins happened. I also grew up in a household that had little to no spirituality. So I had no real, it was very much about the winning and losing, and about the adulation, about what the outside world was feeling, and very little comfort or understanding of what I was all about. And I was also pushed onto a trajectory of being successful because I had achieved some level of success. I think I was being pushed down in a path that I wasn't necessarily of my own volition. So I didn't really get a chance to get to know myself. So it was a very odd period of time in my life.
Interesting.
And then I wound up achieving a lot of things, going professional and playing for the U.S. national team, winning a championship at all the levels that I played. And then I had a career-ending injury, which left me debilitated, psychologically to some degree, because I had to reconfigure my life, where everyone was identifying me and I was identifying myself as a successful athlete. And then I had nothing to really fall back upon when it came to that. So I left San Diego, where I lived, and came back to New York. And for the first time, I was relatively anonymous. No one knew who I was. I was walking down the street. I had no real profession that I could sort of point at and say I was at the top of the heap.
Right.
And then sort of after a couple of years of moping around, I went to law school. And I think that was a very big turning point for me, because I was able to actually achieve in another area of my life. But frankly, some of the same habits carried over, where success and achievement were very important to me. So I did fairly well, and I went to one of the top law firms. But once again, it was a very results-oriented job.
Right.
And I took it as results-oriented. So at this point, I'm looking at how well am I competing against the next person? Am I doing better? It's keeping up with the Joneses. I left there and I wanted to even go higher. So I went to an investment banking firm. I became a banker in New York and London. In the same vein, I think the idea was achieve. And on Wall Street, which this was more squarely on Wall Street,
right.
The idea is can you achieve more money for the firm? And then can you get a bigger bonus year by year?
Right.
All of this still continued to feel empty to me. I think a shift is when I decided, at least I might as well, if I'm going to be empty, I might as well do it on my own. So I started my own firm. And when I started my own firm, I still had no sense of spirituality. I was still very focused externally, had no real refuge internally, and wound up for the most part, doing okay at first. In fact, one of the deals I did that we talk about fairly often, if it makes sense to go into that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, like, before you sort of go into that, it's very interesting to sort of see how all of us sort of evolve, right? We lose one identity, right, as the soccer player, and then it's like, well, what do I do to fill that void? So I'm going to now study, and I'm going to become an attorney. And I'm going to do that. And then after a while, that sort of fizzles out. And, what's the next thing now? Right. And you sort of see that pattern. And that happened to me too. Going up the ranks from, one, I was at GE, then Goldman, and then, Northern Trust. And then we worked together. And so it's just like, we didn't realize it at the time, but we were just sort of jumping to the next thing that would satisfy us for a short amount of time. And so I just it's kind of interesting how that pattern sort of evolves. And so what I wanted to sort of ask you is, and I thought it was very interesting having talked to you in the past about this, is, I mean, you achieved at the material, physical level quite a bit, because, I mean, tell me about some of the examples where, you felt like success was just around the corner, And then once you sort of achieved it, if you did, how you felt and what sort of happened.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the bigger statement there is that it's ephemeral, or what you would say is short-lived.
Yeah.
So you're actually chasing your own tail if it is the only thing that you're living for and you don't have anything else. So you can achieve certain objectives. So if you're losing and you're not doing well, that feels very bad. And even when you're winning, it's like a sugar high. So you're only feeling good for a very short period of time. And then it's, what have you done for me lately? And I was chasing careers really that I thought were perceived as being very status oriented careers
Right.
that would actually sort of, I could keep up with the Joneses, and I could stay sort of in a bit of a limelight, if you will.
Right.
I mean, so in terms of achieving successes, I mean, I think that, and by the way, I knew from fairly early on that something wasn't right, because there wasn't a sustained period of happiness.
Right.
It didn't seem right. But every once in a while, I would feel something and I'd say, wow, that's a good feeling. How can I maintain this feeling?
Right.
But it wasn't really clear to me what that was.
But before you sort of go into that, just like talk about some of those times where you felt you were on top of the world. Like I think in San Diego, I think you felt that you achieved, but then something happened, right? You didn't sort of feel, you felt an emptiness.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I made the team. I was drafted high. I get on the team. I was getting a lot of adulation, which is another thing you have to be very careful of, because at this point I started to live on the adulation.
Yeah.
And so when you're playing at a professional level, even versus say a collegiate level, I think that starts to even get more into the psyche of how you're doing, because there's a lot more pressure in the media, et cetera. I wound up having an injury probably 12 games in. And the coach came and he said, "You're not going to suit up for this game." And that meant I had to put on civilian clothes, go to the locker room, and then I go back up to seats that they had given all the players and sit with the rest of the fans watching the game. And it really hurt me to the extent that I couldn't even sit in my own seats. I had to go to the top of the stadium and watch the game. It was so crushing to me that I wasn't able to
so that
compete.
So what we learned, right, in terms of like the ego identity of that position was so high that it got crunched in a way. And so you don't know how to handle that in a way, right? You're almost ashamed.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I understand that. Yeah.
And there were some media reports that started to be somewhat critical, as it typically would be if you're playing a game for money.
Right. Interesting. And then sort of talk about, as you went through Wall Street, I think you're going to talk about another one of those examples that we've chatted about in the past, which is, I think the big one where you were in the Wall Street Journal, actually, right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, this just shows the extreme to which you'll go. I mean, there was a particular transaction that I really wanted to get with my company, and wound up getting so ultra focused on the deal that I really lost sight of everything around me during probably a 3-month stretch. So much so that I lost 15 pounds. And there really was no option for me but to win. That's a competitive spirit, clearly, right? But all I could see was a goal of winning this deal, and it was an up and down, very difficult, treacherous 3 months. We ultimately wound up winning the deal, and then the accolades came, and the emails came, and the congratulations came, and I thought that was the crowning achievement.
Yeah.
And then probably 3 or 4 weeks in, I sort of like took a nosedive, in part because the emails had stopped, any of the media had stopped, and I was feeling empty somehow, that I had just lost 15 pounds, had no fun for, call it, however many months, if you might include some years. I get to a point where it didn't appear to me at the time, which was short-sighted on my part, that it could get any further, but I was feeling very isolated and not fulfilled. And that was another clear indication that something that the model I was living wasn't the correct model.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what happened after that? Like, did you start, like, was there a point at which you started to then question, like, is this what I'm supposed to do? Or is this how I'm supposed to look at this issue? Or like, how did that sort of evolve then?
I think, I also had the death of my mother at a very early age. So that was also sort of like something that was relatively traumatic, among
Right.
other things in my history. So I was fortunate enough to actually, really frankly, go seek some help about like sort of why I was feeling so empty about that particular issue. In that and being around professionals, I think I started to understand that there were things I needed to work on just as an individual to sort of get my life back into balance and understanding grief, understanding some levels of guilt that I had, understanding, the various things that I think would have popped up in any profession or
Right.
relationship that I ever
Sure.
had. And through that, I started to see spirituality, which I think was the biggest game changer of my life.
And when did that, do you think, happen? 5-6 years ago, or probably longer?
That was in around 2012.
Okay, so about 7-8 years ago. Okay.
Yeah. Where I started to expand my thinking and say, this model may not work. Let me go out and start to explore. I started to actually look into even churches, which to me, I grew up, if you walked into a church, something was wrong with you. I mean, I really grew up, spirituality was a very bad thing.
That's right. I remember you saying that, yeah.
And then there's something inside of me that said, that is not right. And I trusted my instinct and started to move more and more and more closer to spirituality. I dabbled in Buddhism,
Right.
I dabbled in almost anything you could possibly think of to try to figure out like where it was. And it all felt very expansive to me.
Okay.
Really, it felt like, but at this time I wasn't meditating and I wasn't going necessarily internally. So it was an intellectual conquest, but it felt very good to me to know. And it felt right that there was something outside of this sort of, framed body and external world that was bigger.
Yeah.
And I think it opened my eyes to that. And then it frankly ultimately led me to where I'm sitting today with you, with Rona and Brahma Kumaris, which is when I think I really went into full expansion mode and started to get a better handle on it.
Interesting.
That there is something bigger, that there is a place called home that I truly believe in that isn't necessarily here.
Right.
There are things to aspire for that aren't the things that I conventionally learned to aspire towards. I don't think any of those things are wrong. I just think back to any points in my career had I had this level of balance and groundedness and practice in meditation, spirituality, and understanding, I would have had a much better time and frankly been better at everything I did.
Right, right. But how great is it that now you have the ability to do it now, right? And that at least the opportunity has come to you at this point in your life, right?
Yes.
I think my story is a little bit, not quite like as extreme as yours in terms of some of the things that you've had to deal with. But once I left 2008, 2009, I also went on a sort of a spiritual conquest. And I also dabbled in some other groups before coming here. And, I learned a few very interesting concepts while I was on that journey. And one of the things I learned was one of the teachers I came across came and basically explained this sort of formula to me that's saying that, typically, how do you feel rich, right? What is your definition of being materially rich? You just look at your assets, right? And you look at how much you have in the bank, traditional way of looking at things. But he was saying to me, he's like, you have to really feel rich, you have to look at the equation as your assets divided by your desires, right? And so if you have a lot of money and you're a billionaire, but your desire is to become a multi-billionaire, you're not really rich. And if you have only $100,000 or whatever, but you've reduced your desires to such a small amount, that fraction becomes quite large, right? So that sort of got me onto thinking that, okay, I don't always have to work in the numerator of that equation. I can work on the denominator, and I can work on myself to such an extent and to how do I now lower my desires for this world and the things around me and all the things that I've been latching onto for my value. If I can actually reduce that and know that those things will keep changing, like my job was gone like this, bank account was going down like this, right? And I thought I had control, but I lost all control at that time, at that point. And so now what do I do? Where do I go? How do I find something where, as things are changing around me, I can still remain in that higher state? And if I go to that higher state, the lower desires in my life start to fade away. And if they fade away, then I will feel rich, right? So I was sort of going on that philosophy and keeping on going down that path, right? And then slowly, I sort of found this path, and you kind of know what sort of happened, after that, in terms of, strictly really getting into this Raj Yoga meditation and the philosophy behind it, and then really seeing the bigger picture, as I think you're starting to see. Right.
No, I mean, that's a great story, and I think we could all find common ground in
Yeah.
what you just said. I mean, I think if I were to look at that scenario, if I had to put a word on it, there was some level of attachment
Yeah.
and ownership of things outside of me, forgetting how big or small they were. It was, I needed certain things, and I feel like that was sort of what you were saying.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that really continues to be important is trying to, and I've learned this here with Rona, about the idea of a game. To me, even as an athlete, was not a game.
Right.
It was the most serious thing that you could ever possibly imagine.
Right, because it's win or loss.
It's win or lose.
Determines
Right.
everything for you. Yeah, right.
And so if I could go about even high achieving things, right? So, continuing to try to achieve certain things. And now I have a business that actually is more aligned with what my passion is in terms of doing things in life. But obviously I'm going to still have high levels of anticipation of what I want to achieve in it. But if I could say, I want to be happy doing this.
Right.
I want to feel excitement in doing this. I want to, of course, I want to make a difference, but I want to feel more about what it is that I'm doing, as opposed to just getting to the end on the achievement level.
Mm.
And to me, the more I practice that, meditation has been very helpful. The better off I am, and I think my intellect around that is better. I didn't even understand that was an option. Can you choose to think a certain way? Well, you can choose to think a certain way.
Right.
So that, as I said before, I think if you choose to think that way, even some of the things I've done in the past that may, in soccer, let's say it was at a fairly high level, I think I could have gone further.
Right.
Just because I would have been, looser in my approach to it, would have had more fun. And I look back to those experiences, and they were not fun experiences. I don't think I would have worked less hard or anything.
Right. Right.
I just think it would have been a better experience.
Right.
And I think switching that mindset. And then the other thing is really the ability to go into meditation and actually, for me, to actually connect into a higher power.
Right.
It sort of fuels me, and also makes me feel more connected to my fellow humans. I think in a lot of the professions I've been in, and I said keeping up with the Joneses, there's been it's me versus you.
Right.
And that doesn't feel right for me as a person.
Yeah.
But I was in professions that sort of was a grabby type way.
Right.
It was athletics, and some of my best experiences, even when I was an athlete, sort of in certain periods, was when I felt, even if my competitors were part of my team.
And this is what you were talking to me. I think we talked about this before, where I think after your pro career was sort of finished, you were playing in a very interesting scrimmage game where there was no, the result of which wasn't that important. So take us through that example.
Yeah, it was very bizarre. And this is the type of thing where you get hints in life that let you know you may be on the wrong track, but you certainly know there's another track.
Right.
And I was in a relatively high caliber game. My career had all been basically said that it was done, but I still could play. and I'm in a game, and for whatever reason, I wound up being very free flowing and very, I hate to use the word in an athletic context, but it was very loving. I felt very loving in the game. And I was in a very flow state that allowed me to play extremely well. But what I remember vividly is that even my competitors felt like I had love for them. Now, grant you, I was still playing against my competitors, and I was still, but I was in such a state that everything seemed like it was all part of a connected universe. And that gave me a glimpse into what I think is what is the truer state. And that everything else leading up to that was a conditioning.
Right.
It was a false conditioning.
Right. Interesting. So at that time, what did you think of it? Like, what did you think that was?
I didn't know what to make of it. All I know is that there's been several other times in my life where that's happened. Sort of, I just knew it was a miraculous experience, and it made me want to understand what it was more. And since then, I've come to understand what it is. 20 years later.
Yeah, that's interesting. So now, sort of, take us now on your journey when you started to really, kind of get into the, I'd say the process of really being consistent, of trying to meditate and trying to take on some of the knowledge that, the center and the Brahma Kumaris have maybe imparted on you. Like, how do you, looking forward, or sort of after that period of when you were achieving and not really getting anywhere, how do you sort of look at it now after the last few years of being exposed to this? And I could tell you my reason, but after,
Well, quickly, I mean, I feel like it was a seismic shift in my life. I mean, frankly, not to be overly personal here, but you and Anjali took me by the hand and really cared about me and brought me to the center where I was able to meet Rona.
Right.
And because of my level of trust at that point for you as a friend, I just gave myself in fully. I was also pretty exasperated by the results that I was having. And then, so I learned, not immediately, but I learned, and I tried to stay somewhat consistent with meditation. And then and I was able to stay close to or be as close as I could at the time, I thought, with a community that also believed in the same things, which is very important to sort of continue to encourage me to do it. But ultimately, it was learning meditation and the ability to practice meditation. And what I did learn through that is that just like practicing soccer, is that I had to stay relatively consistent to feel the way I wanted to feel.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like I could meditate every other day, or from me, and everyone could be different, but the advice I would give anyone, including myself, but right now it's like brushing teeth. I cannot go a day without meditating. That doesn't mean there aren't bad days, but it means that if I let days go by, I know what the result's going to be. It's going to have an impact on me getting too inside what's going on in the outside world. Whereas if I'm allowing myself to actually go internal and have a connection with the higher power, it's going to energize me and give me a much bigger boost for everything else. It's going to make me feel more connected, and I'm ready, whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's anything else. And certainly through this sort of pandemic, I've been doubling down and doing even more meditation.
Right. Oh, that's good.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask about your experience.
I mean, for me, it's just been unbelievably 180-degree shift in terms of how I look at the world. Before, like I said before, I looked at all these conditionings as my way of sort of meeting certain expectations so that my ego would be fulfilled. Like, oh, I'm making this much. I live here. I've got this type of car. This is, blah, 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 all the things that we look at externally, right? And so we're sort of like juggling them, knowing that, any of those things can shift, anything can change, and all those things are temporary, right? And then knowing that I, as a being of light, and I am a soul, and that I'm just temporarily like playing this part of Satyan, really sort of helped me understand that this is not end all be all, right? And that I have such a huge journey, and that as a soul, it's going to be taking multiple journeys through different bodies, through different families, through different relatives, through different friends and different customs and cultures. And, can you just imagine that? It's like the example we give students, right? It's like, imagine you're in a house with like maybe 20 rooms, right? You go through the first room and you see the clothing that you had as a child. You were a Chinese woman, and you had all these clothes all the way from when you were a baby to all the way to when you died. You have all these trophies on your nightstand. You have certain pictures of people on your windowsill. You got different decorations, and then you leave that room, and then you go to another room, and in that room you were a Brazilian man, growing up on a farm. So you had a completely different set of clothes and a different set of pictures and different relatives and different people in your life and different culture and food. And that's just two lives, right? So imagine doing that maybe over 15, 20 different times, and you're in that 20th life now, for example. And we get so stuck in this one life. And if you can just pull yourself out of that for a moment and just realize how many, on the big journey, how many different things that you must have done, how many different roles you must have played, how many different obstacles you must have encountered. And that's just at the physical level, right? And then to know that you're a soul and that this isn't truly your home, right? And that you're just here to play the game and that you're already complete. Imagine that feeling. You're already complete. You need nothing in this world. And then you come into this body, and then you play the game, and then you go to Wall Street. My whole perception shifted, right? Because now it's like I'm not valuing the things society is valuing me, but I'm connected to the highest of high, and that energy values me for something completely different than what society values me for, right? And that's the truth, and this is falsehood, right? And it's sort of like this idea that when I try to explain this to some new students, is that it's like, imagine running in a massive race in one direction, right? We're all running on the Brooklyn Bridge, thousands of people. They don't know when the race started. They don't know when the race is going to end. They don't know where they're supposed to go, but they're all running. Everybody's just running in the same direction. And you somehow say, you know what, I'm going to go in the opposite direction. And they all think you're crazy because you actually know where you're going and you know the destination. But this herd mentality just sucks us in, and like, imagine if you just know some more extra information than everybody else, and you're operating from a completely different sphere of understanding. And that is what felt so empowering to me, and that's and doesn't mean I don't go backwards, because society will come and influence you, but just to kind of keep coming back to where you're supposed to be, and where you're truly valued, right? And so I feel like you've probably had glimpses of what I'm probably talking about, right? And I feel that incentive is what kind of keeps you going. For me, it does, at least.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, yeah, once you get a glimpse, or once you're doing it, you can't stop. It's basically, you're living at 2% when you have now 98% is open.
right.
I don't know how to explain it, but the universe is expanded. So it's when I think, I have two daughters, and I think about them, and I think about sort of the traditional educational system, math and history, etc.
Right.
I'm not really sure why we don't teach these things earlier on to kids, because I certainly think back to my youth, and I almost feel bad for myself not having the ability to actually have this tool.
Right,
And this
right.
really what I think is really an understanding. And I think we are indoctrinating people in a certain way. Um, but your notion of going against the grain, that always concerned me too, is like, and
Yeah,
I think a lot of people get concerned is if I start doing this, how am I now going to be different than other people?
yeah,
I feel like what I'm starting to get a glimpse of is that there is a way to do this and to actually practice this and to believe these things and actually get more connected to people and feel like you're still going in the
yeah.
same direction. But one thing it won't allow you to do, it will not allow you to, and this is what I've also learned here at the Brahma Kumaris, it will not allow you not to provide service to other people.
Right,
So you feel like you want to be connected and of service to other people, whether it's inside this community or externally. You
right.
do feel like you've seen something that's valuable to everyone.
Exactly. And one of the things I've learned through this is to understand when we do go to our jobs and we go to our high pressured professions, right? And you got to act quick and you got to, be professional and social and problem solving. You got to do all that stuff. But my main mission now is to serve the people around me. And it's not even through the words, but it's through the stage that you set for yourself, right? And your demeanor and your behavior and the way you relate to other people, right? And it's like, can you actually be in a stage where you're being berated by one of your colleagues or your boss and you can actually have love for that soul? Right. And so that person will feel that at some stage. And that is kind of the ultimate sort of service that you're doing while you're at work. It's not really giving them the lecture and doing this and that, but it's through your stage and your example and what you bring to the table, which is going to attract the best out of them. Right. Like one of the things we learn here is that, and I think both of us have sort of figured this out on a big scale, is that we cannot change the external world in order to bring internal peace, right? Or happiness. But it's truly through your internal shift that I think we're both sort of going through at different paces that will bring the best towards you. In other words, you shift to become pure, and the pure and the good will start coming to you because like attracts like, right? This is a common saying, common theme. And it may not happen right away, but it makes sense. And so why not work at the root? Why not work on yourself in order to attract what you truly want to see in the world? And so, I mean, that has been a big shift in terms of the perception, right? It's like we get stuck in the weeds. I think the other day we were talking about this idea of the spider web, right? And if you're actually on the spider web, you're all entangled and you're like, can't see the forest for the trees. But if you can actually like zoom out and you see the beauty of the symmetrical shape of the spider web and how the whole thing weaves together and the beauty of it, right? It's so different as an observer. And so for you and for me, it's like, do you want to be on the roller coaster going up and down like with everybody else? Or can you sort of step back and see the beauty of the up and down, beauty of the roller coaster while just observing it? And this is a constant struggle, by the way. It's not just automatic, but that's the stage I think we need to set. And that's what we need to do. And that's how we get to that higher level, right? And so to your point, no matter what's going on out here, you can maybe stay okay.
Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, I think there's an ability to stay detached and and connected, but also not attached to certain things,
Right.
results, etc. But the other thing I'd say from a personal growth development is for me, I don't know for you, is I start to, at this ripe age, start to learn more things about myself.
Mm.
And so it's allowed for me to open up and sort of see that some of the conventional things, forgetting about success and ambition and all these things, there are other things that I like or feel good about that I'm able to explore in this inner journey, if you will.
Interesting. Yeah.
And it gives me more confidence to go out and actually have the conversations externally. And it's so it starts to have a manifest shift externally as well, which has been good. So I'm going down a path, many paths that I wouldn't have gone down but for this. And they're very enjoyable paths. And it's also feeling like there's no end. You start to get used to the fact that this is an evolution. It's a revolution in that you found it,
Right.
and it's an evolution as you're practicing.
Right. Wow, interesting. So what's like an example of something that's worked out, maybe, or you've done something as a result of this that you may not have done if you didn't do this? Like things that have opened up in your life or the way you've thought about certain things.
Well, I think I'd have to think a
Yeah,
little bit
no,
more about that, but I mean, a lot of it is just a much more open and expansive view about connection to people, in all parts of society. This, by the way, is something I felt as a kid. Very many of these things are not things that I couldn't go back and say I had a hint at when I was younger.
Right.
And this is the thing that I think you're at home because you're saying, wow, I remember feeling that way, but it sort of got stamped out of me because there was such a heavy level of conventional thinking and how you're supposed to do things.
Right.
And so now you can go back and with ease actually do things that make you just feel comfortable. I want to be around certain people, and maybe I wasn't before, and now I am.
Right.
And this is just part of who I am.
Right. Exactly. It's like going back to your original stage, right? And feeling free and secure.
Exactly.
Right. That's one of the things we try to cultivate.
Yeah, I've come to believe, and this is something I've learned here as well with Rona, is that Om Shanti, I'm a peaceful being. I truly believe in my heart of hearts that I believed that when I was 5. As early as I could think, I remember believing that. But I don't believe I walk that walk because of what we've been discussing.
Right.
But right now, when I don't feel that way, I know something is amiss.
Interesting.
Right? And that could be many times. So we're still on this journey.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
There's still a whole lot of conditioning that has been sort of over the years,
of course,
sort of steeped in how you live. But it's from an intellectual standpoint, and then a sort of a manifest standpoint. I say, oh, this doesn't feel right. I might need to take a left here.
Yeah.
Because I'm not feeling peaceful or I'm not connecting in a way. But when I'm connecting, it's like, it just feels exactly like home should feel.
Interesting. Now, I remember something interesting you had said to me, that when you were growing up, like ego was a good thing, right? That's how you grew up, right? And that's how I didn't sort of grow up like that, but it's interesting how is that now shifted, knowing what you know?
Well, I like to say I grew up with, and this is no way to, castigate anyone, but I did grow up with a playbook was almost like the opposite playbook. Is the opposite one I would give my daughters,
right,
or someone else. In other words, being confrontational,
right,
and not allowing anything to sort of, just how can I say, having an ego,
right,
not allowing people to step on your toes, being very hyper vigilant, hypersensitive, and there's a community I grew up in was a very difficult community, I might say, difficult in the sense that it was a tough place to grow up, but so there's certain survival skills that you had to have, but I think the learning is try not to be a peaceful being.
Interesting.
Try to show a different side to yourself, which is sad.
Right.
That was it took a while to shed that.
Yeah, I'm sure that you have to sort of deprogram that out of your psyche, and so through the meditation practices, would you say, like, how have you sort of evolved on that theory of ego? And
it's a game changer.
Yeah,
it really is. I mean, meditating consistently, and also knowing sort of what it feels like to be in a connected state of mind, connected here,
Right.
and connected here, is something that I want to continue. And like I said, when it doesn't happen, and it does not happen all the
Of
time,
course.
I know when it's not happening,
Right.
and it's not a desirous state for me. I actually do still believe, though, because I think some people would not think this, you could still be as competitive as with this way of being.
Right.
So it doesn't take you out of, and this was one of the concerns when I came into the Brahma
Yeah.
Kumaris and doing more meditation,
Yeah.
is this going to take my mojo away?
Right.
This is something that took me a long time to get, and I've achieved certain things. No, it made me feel happier and also feel like I'm even more competitive in a certain regard, if that
Right.
makes any sense. If
Yeah.
that's the right word.
Right, right. It's almost like, and this is something I was struggling with too for a little bit, but now I sort of get the point that if you're coming at all of life from that perspective, knowing that this is just a short little speck of your journey, but you have this opportunity, you play the game to the highest level that you can, but then don't get upset if the result doesn't go the way you want, right? And so not attaching yourself to the result makes you actually better at the game, which then goes back to that story of when you were in San Diego and you felt this love for everybody because there was no result, right, associated with that. And so I look back at that story and I'm like, wow, that's like a perfect example of somebody that just sort of let it go, just played at his highest level without any expectation, and you are like ruling the field, right? So that I thought was an interesting example. What I would say, I'm trying to understand something else I was going to ask you, but I guess in terms of the things that you've learned here, like what are some of the principles that you tend to sort of latch onto that have the strongest, like it's just easy for you to sort of work with? Like what do you sort of go to like when you're meditating, or the principles you've used over the last few years, one or two things that may easily you sort of grasp onto?
I mean, maybe outside of some of the things we've already talked about, which is meditating consistently.
Yeah.
And obviously everyone I think is idiosyncratically going to have a different way to meditate. But I think Raja Yoga, if you will, the way I understand it, is sort of a moving meditation, is something that's very helpful. So it's not only when I'm actually in a silent place, it's actually when I'm moving around and doing things. And I try to sort of, still stay in that sort of
stage
remembrance, if you will.
Right.
Really. And I think that's been a very big help, because it's not, you just sit here and you're meditating and then you're out in the world. You're bringing it out into the world with you, which to me is a much more practical way to practice.
Right. Interesting. And how would you sort of think about this sort of going forward with your journey and like with your kids, and how has it sort of changed you personally in terms of your habits, what you eat, how you sleep? Has all that sort of shifted, or has that sort of stayed the same?
Everything has shifted in that regard. My eating habits have changed. My sleeping habits have changed. I've just gotten rid of a lot of things that really don't serve me.
Right.
Frankly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I felt the same way. I mean, I sort of did always grow up as a vegetarian, but I used to go out with people for work and you'd socially drink and stuff, but I never liked it. And so when I came into this, it just automatically left. I became a pretty good cook now. I've cooked like all my food, for myself, my wife. All these new things started to like develop into my life, like automatically, getting up early. That meant, and this is another thing I wanted to just mention before, I know we have about a few more minutes left, but my Columbia professor, my finance professor, always told us one thing that I always remembered. When we were evaluating companies, he would always use the ratio of P to V. And he would basically say, like, you want to pay the cheapest price for the most value, right? And so he's like, you can use this equation in the rest of your life for other things that you do. And when I look at meditation, it's probably the biggest least price that I have to pay for the biggest value that you get, right? And so that's how you should think about your life in that ratio. Do the things that give you the most value for the least that you have to pay for, right? So if you can just invest a little bit of your time every day in this practice, it will pay massive dividends for you over your whole life. And I think that's the sort of journey that I think I'm on, and I think you're on as well. And it's been great, by the way, talking to you over the years and, rekindling the relationship after almost 10 years, I think. And then sort of seeing you evolve, and I've seen the changes in you over the years, and it's been great to see. And I hope you continue that journey, and I'm sure you will, because I think you're at the point of no return now.
This is the proverbial point of no return.
Right.
And I have much gratitude to you, Satya.
Not to me, but to the whole center and Rona and the whole
Of
study
course,
that we've been given, all of us. Yeah, so we're just happy to be that you're part of the community, and that you're part of this whole thing. So I know we have about 4 minutes left, but shall we do a little meditation to end the session? And thank you also, everybody that's watching. Hope you're getting something out of this, as we have been. And so why don't we sort of end the session with a brief meditation. So just put your backs, sit up straight, have your feet firmly on the ground, and just have a deep breath in, deep breath out, and just maintain a nice rhythm for your breath. And just feel the physical sensations around you, any noises, and just observe them. And as we do this, we slowly withdraw from the physical senses, and we move inwards. And as we raise our energy from our legs, through our back, through our neck, all the way to the top of our forehead, we remember that we play so many roles in this life. Whether you're a brother or a son or a father or a sister or a daughter or mother, co-worker, neighbor, so many roles and so many labels that are put upon us. But who is it, that one that is behind all those labels and roles? Who is the one that plays all those roles? It is the soul, that beautiful, invisible, divine, godlike energy that sits in the middle of your forehead. And this soul is birthless, and this soul is deathless. It is eternal. It is immortal. And it is the one that runs this body. This body may perish at some point, but the soul will go on to play the next role in a new body. The soul comes from the home of light and silence, completely full of peace, completely full of silence, completely secure, has no needs for anything in this physical world. Indivisible being of godly light. That is who you are. And you simply play a role in this body. You are the soul. Om Shanti. Thank you. Good night. Thank you, Don, on the behalf of the Manhattan family and myself. Thank you for coming and sharing today. I really appreciate it. And hopefully you all enjoyed, and we'll hopefully see you next week. Thank you. Om Shanti.